said you are under arrest for impersonating a military officer.
Officers, unlawful arrest.
Put your hands behind your back. Now.
You are making a
ending
career.
mistake.
The California sun was relentless, a brilliant, unforgiving white glare that baked the asphalt of the Pacific Coast Highway. Inside the air-conditioned quiet of a restored 1968 Ford Mustang, Lieutenant Daniel Foster felt a universe away from the heat. The deep, rumbling bass of the V8 engine was a comforting thrum against his polished dress shoes. His hands, steady and sure, the same hands that had guided SEAL Team 5 through hostile waters, rested lightly on the wooden steering wheel. He was 32 years old, with eyes that held the placid calm of the deep ocean and a jawline that looked like it was carved from coastal granite. He was wearing his service dress whites. The jacket was immaculate, a stark, brilliant white against the black leather of the Mustang's interior. On his left breast, a constellation of ribbons told the story of a decade spent in the nation's service. At the very top, set apart with the reverence it deserved, was the Silver Star. It came from a moonless night in the Somali Basin, a hostage rescue mission where the line between coming home and being a memory was measured in millimeters and seconds. Foster didn't think about that night often. He didn't have to. The medal did the remembering for him. He was on his way to a Navy League Awards dinner in San Diego, an event honoring veterans and active duty members. His command had insisted he attend. He'd rather be running drills with his team, but orders were orders. He checked his watch. 14:30. Plenty of time. He was just cruising, enjoying the rare peace of a solo drive. The Pacific Ocean, a vast, shimmering expanse of blue to his right. Then he saw them, flashing red and blue lights in his rearview mirror, a local sheriff's department patrol car closing fast. Foster's training, a decade of it etched into his very neurons, took over. Check mirrors, signal, pull over smoothly and completely onto the shoulder. He killed the engine, the V8's roar dying into a respectful silence. He rolled down the window, placed both hands on top of the steering wheel, and waited. There was no anxiety, no fear. This was just a process, a procedure. The deputy who approached the window was young, maybe 34, with a hard, angular face and the kind of tightly coiled energy that seemed to vibrate with impatience. His name tag read Slater. His eyes, shielded by mirrored sunglasses, didn't look at Foster's face. They were locked on the uniform, on the ribbons, on the Silver Star. "License and registration," Slater said, his voice flat, devoid of any courtesy. "Of course, officer," Foster replied, his tone even and calm. He moved his right hand slowly, deliberately toward the glove compartment. "My wallet is in the glove box and the registration is with it. I'm reaching for it now." He narrated his every move, a habit learned from countless high-stakes encounters where a misunderstanding could be fatal. Slater didn't respond. He just watched, his hand resting near the butt of his sidearm. Foster retrieved the documents, handing them out the window. Slater took them, his fingers brushing against Foster's. The deputy's eyes scanned the driver's license, then the name on the registration. He looked back at the uniform. A flicker of something, disbelief or maybe disdain, crossed his face before he suppressed it. "You know why I pulled you over?" Slater asked, the question sounding more like an accusation. "No, sir, I do not," Foster said. "Cracked taillight, right rear assembly," Slater stated, tapping the ticket book on his hip. "It's a violation, a safety hazard." Foster nodded slowly. "I see. I wasn't aware of that, officer. I'll get it fixed immediately." He had done a full check of the car that morning. He knew for a fact there was no cracked taillight. But he also knew this wasn't about a taillight. Arguing the point would be like trying to argue with the tide, futile and counterproductive. The goal of the encounter was to de-escalate and move on. Slater seemed almost disappointed by Foster's compliance. It was clear he was expecting something else. An argument, a challenge, an attitude. Foster's military calm, his unshakable composure seemed to irritate the deputy more than any outburst could have. "Just got back from playing hero?" Slater asked, his gaze lingering on the Silver Star. The question was loaded, dripping with a sarcasm so thick it was almost oily. Foster's posture didn't change. His hands remained on the wheel. "I just got back from serving my country, officer." "Right. Your service," Slater sneered, making air quotes with his fingers. He leaned in closer, his reflection a distorted mask in the mirrored sunglasses. "You know, a lot of guys buy these uniforms at surplus stores, buy the medals online, try to get free drinks and a pat on the back." The accusation hung in the hot, still air. It was a direct challenge not just to Foster's integrity, but to the memory of the men who had fought alongside him. Still, Foster held his ground. Anger was a luxury you couldn't afford in the field, and you couldn't afford it here either. "This uniform was issued to me by the United States Navy, officer," Foster said, his voice a low, steady baritone. "And these medals were earned." Slater pushed himself back from the car, a humorless smile twisting his lips. "We'll see about that. Step out of the vehicle." The command was sharp, a clear escalation. There was no legal reason for it. This was no longer a traffic stop. This was a power play. Foster took a slow, measured breath. He had faced down armed hostiles in forgotten corners of the world with less malice in their eyes than he saw in this deputy's reflection. "Officer, am I being detained?" he asked, using the precise legal language his training had taught him. "You are now," Slater snapped. "Out of the car. Hands where I can see them." Slowly, deliberately, Lieutenant Daniel Foster, decorated Navy SEAL, opened the door of his Mustang. The brilliant white of his uniform seemed to defy the dusty shoulder of the highway as he stepped out into the oppressive California heat, the quiet dignity of his bearing a stark contrast to the simmering hostility of the man with the badge. The situation was escalating, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him more than the ocean ever could, that it was about to get much worse. As Lieutenant Foster stood on the gravel shoulder, the sun beat down on his dark hair. The traffic on the PCH hummed past, a river of indifferent steel and glass. For a moment, the scene felt surreal. One minute, he was a respected officer on his way to be honored. The next, he was standing on the side of a highway being treated like a common criminal by a man who clearly had a problem with authority, or at least, with his authority. "Turn around. Place your hands on the roof of the car," Slater commanded, his voice tight with a strange, predatory excitement. Foster complied without a word. He placed his palms flat on the hot metal roof of his Mustang, his dress whites a beacon of order against the chaos of the moment. He could feel Slater's eyes on him, scanning his body, searching for any sign of resistance. He gave him none. His training was a bedrock. Comply, observe, survive. The debrief comes later. "Why are you doing this, officer?" Foster asked, his voice steady. He wasn't pleading, he was gathering information. "Failure to comply," Slater grunted, his voice close to Foster's ear now. "And I don't like your attitude." "I have complied with every one of your instructions," Foster stated, keeping his tone perfectly neutral. "That's your problem. You're too calm, it's suspicious," Slater shot back, the logic so twisted it was almost laughable. He began a rough pat-down, his hands clumsy and unnecessarily firm. He was looking for a reaction, a flinch, anything to justify the aggression welling up inside him. Foster remained as still as a statue. He had endured far worse with far more at stake. This was just pressure. He knew how to handle pressure. Slater found nothing but a wallet and a set of keys. He pulled the wallet out of Foster's back pocket, flipping it open. He saw the military ID card, full name, rank, photo, a holographic seal shimmering in the sun. It was undeniable proof, a federal document that screamed authenticity. For a second, Slater paused. This was his off-ramp, his chance to pull back from the cliff edge. He could look at the ID, look at the man, and end this charade. He didn't. Instead, he tossed the wallet onto the roof of the car. "These are easy to fake," he muttered, though the words lacked conviction. He was in too deep now. Backing down would be an admission of error, a wound to his fragile ego. He unclipped his handcuffs from his belt. The metallic ratchet sound was sharp and ugly in the seaside air. "You are under arrest for impersonating a military officer and resisting an officer," Slater declared, the words a pre-rehearsed script. He grabbed Foster's right wrist, twisting it behind his back with more force than necessary. This was the tipping point. The line had been crossed. The injustice was no longer a threat, it was a physical reality. As Slater reached for his other arm, Foster spoke, his voice dropping slightly, losing its procedural calm and gaining a new, focused intensity. "Officer, I am respectfully advising you to stop," he said. "This is an unlawful arrest, and you are making a mistake that will have severe consequences for your career." The warning only enraged Slater further. "Is that a threat?" he snarled, yanking Foster's arm harder. "Now you can add threatening a law enforcement officer to the list." The first cuff clicked shut around Foster's wrist. The cold steel bit into his skin. The second followed a moment later. Lieutenant Daniel Foster, a man who had been awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action, was now handcuffed on the side of the Pacific Coast Highway for the crime of having a suspiciously calm demeanor. Slater shoved him toward the patrol car, his pride swelling. He had taken down a fake, a phony who thought he could get away with wearing a uniform he didn't earn. In his mind, he was the hero of this story. "You get one phone call," Slater said as he pushed Foster into the searingly hot back seat of the cruiser. "Make it a good one." He slammed the door shut, leaving Foster in the cramped, plastic-molded space that smelled of stale sweat and disinfectant. Through the metal grill, Foster watched Slater walk back to the Mustang. He knew he had maybe 30 seconds. He pulled out his personal phone, which Slater had somehow missed in his cursory pat-down. His fingers moved quickly across the screen, muscle memory taking over. He didn't call a lawyer. He didn't call his parents. He didn't call his commanding officer. He hit a single speed dial number. It was answered on the first ring with no greeting. Just silence. Foster brought the phone to his lips. He spoke 5 words, his voice low and clear, a concise report from a field agent to his handler. "The package is compromised. Initiate protocol scimitar." He ended the call before the person on the other end could reply. He didn't need a reply. The message was sent. The system was activated. He slid the phone into the crack of the seat, erasing the evidence of the call. He had done his part. Now he just had to wait. He leaned his head back against the hard plastic seat, the California sun blazing through the window. He was calm. He was a Navy SEAL, captured behind enemy lines. The enemy just happened to be wearing a sheriff's uniform, and the lines had been drawn on a highway in his own country. He closed his eyes. The clock was ticking. For Officer Slater, it was ticking down to the biggest mistake of his life. The drive to the Malibu Lost Hills Sheriff's Station was short and silent. Officer Slater drove with a rigid, self-satisfied posture, occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror at his prisoner. He saw exactly what he wanted to see: a fraud, a man whose quiet dignity was surely a mask for deceit. He didn't see the decorated officer, the seasoned warrior, the man who had just set in motion a chain of events that would shatter Slater's world. They walked into the station, the blast of cold air a shock after the roadside heat. The booking area was a drab, functional space. Linoleum floors, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the smell of burnt coffee thick in the air. A few deputies looked up from their desks, their eyes drawn to the sight of a man in immaculate dress whites being led in handcuffs. There was a moment of collective confusion. It was a scene that simply didn't compute. Behind the booking desk sat Sergeant Frank Reynolds. Reynolds was 58 years old, a 30-year veteran of the department with a face like a roadmap of long nights and tough calls. Before he wore the tan uniform of the Sheriff's Department, he had worn the uniform of the U.S. Army Military Police for 2 tours in Germany during the Cold War. He knew uniforms, he knew regulations, and more importantly, he knew men. The second he saw Lieutenant Foster, Reynolds felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He didn't just see the dress whites, he saw the cut, the fit, the precise, almost obsessive placement of every ribbon and device. He saw the bearing of the man wearing it, the straight back, the steady eyes, the utter lack of panic. This wasn't a man in a costume. This was a man in his element, even in handcuffs. His eyes immediately found the Silver Star. Then the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal with the V for Valor, the Combat Action Ribbon. He didn't need to see the ID. He knew. "Slater, what in God's name is this?" Reynolds asked, his voice a low rumble that cut through the quiet hum of the station. He stood up, his large frame blocking Slater's path to the holding cells. "Got a wannabe, Sarge," Slater announced, puffing out his chest. "Impersonating an officer, failure to comply, the works. Found him on the PCH, probably trying to scam his way into some fancy event." Reynolds ignored Slater. He walked around the desk and stood directly in front of Foster. He looked him in the eye, a silent question passing between two men who understood the language of service. Then he looked at the ribbons again, his gaze professional and assessing. "That Silver Star," Reynolds said, his voice quiet. "Where'd you earn it?" "Somali Basin, Sergeant. Hostage Rescue 2021, Foster replied, his voice respectful. There was no embellishment, just a statement of fact. Reynolds nodded slowly. He'd read the declassified reports. He knew about that mission. "SEAL Team 5, he stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes, Sergeant." A heavy silence fell over the booking area. The other deputies were now watching intently, sensing the monumental shift in the room's dynamics. Slater's smug expression began to falter, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. "His ID could be fake, Sarge," Slater stammered, holding up Foster's wallet. "The whole getup could be a sham." Reynolds took the wallet from Slater's hand without looking at him. He pulled out the military ID card. It was a Common Access Card, or CAC. He'd seen thousands of them. He felt the weight of it, saw the embedded smart chip, tilted it under the light to see the complex holographic overlay shift and shimmer. He ran his thumb over the raised lettering. It was as real as the floor beneath his feet. To suggest it was fake was an act of willful ignorance. "Slater, did you run this ID?" Reynolds asked, his voice dangerously calm. I didn't have a chance. He was being non-compliant," Slater lied. The lie was clumsy, transparent. "Non-compliant?" Reynolds shot back, his eyes narrowing. "This man is a Navy SEAL. His entire existence is built on compliance and discipline. What exactly did he do?" "He had an attitude. He was too calm. It was suspicious." Slater's voice was getting louder, more defensive. Reynolds just stared at him. "Too calm," he repeated, the words dripping with contempt. "You arrested a naval officer, a decorated hero, because he didn't panic when you pulled him over?" He turned to Foster. "Son, what is your full name, rank, and service number?" "Lieutenant Daniel Foster, United States Navy. Service number..." Foster recited the number from memory. Reynolds turned back to his desk, took the ID card, and walked back behind the booking counter. He sat down at his computer terminal and began typing. "I'm going to make a call to Naval Base Coronado," he announced to the room, "and I'm going to verify this officer's status. And while I do that, Slater, you are going to stand right there, and you are not going to say another damn word." He picked up the phone. As he punched in the number for the public affairs office at the base, he could feel Slater's world shrinking, the walls of his own arrogance closing in on him. Reynolds knew, with the kind of gut certainty that comes from 30 years on the job, that he wasn't just making a phone call. He was lighting the fuse on a bomb that Slater himself had built. And from the look in Lieutenant Foster's eyes, a look of profound and unshakable patience, Reynolds had a feeling that bomb was set to go off much sooner than anyone expected. Sergeant Reynolds had the phone pressed to his ear, waiting for someone at Naval Base Coronado to pick up. He was planning to handle this quietly, to verify Foster's status, release him with a profound apology, and then personally escort Officer Slater into the chief's office for what would be the beginning of the end of his career. It was going to be a messy internal affair, but it would be contained. That was the plan. The plan lasted for another 10 seconds. The main precinct line, the one that blinked red on every phone in the station, began to ring. It wasn't a normal ring. It was a shrill, insistent, non-stop shriek, as if the person on the other end was holding down the dial button. The receptionist, a woman named Carol, answered it. Her voice the standard, placid, Lost Hills Sheriff's Station, how can I help you? Her eyes went wide. She listened for a moment, then covered the mouthpiece, her hand trembling slightly. Sergeant Reynolds, she whispered, her voice strained. It's for you. It's a Master Chief Petty Officer from Naval Special Warfare Command. Reynolds felt a jolt. That was fast, impossibly fast. He hung up his call to Coronado and punched the blinking red light. Sergeant Reynolds. The voice on the other end was gravelly, hard as iron, and held zero tolerance for pleasantries. Sergeant, this is Master Chief Franklin of NAV Spec Warcom. I am calling to inform you that you have an active-duty Naval Special Warfare operator in your custody. His name is Lieutenant Daniel Foster. You will release him immediately. Is that understood? It was not a request. It was a direct order from a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. Master Chief, I'm in the process of verifying, Reynolds began. Verification is over, Sergeant, Franklin cut him off. I am verifying it for you, right now. You are holding a national asset on what I am told is a baseless charge. Your station is now on the radar of some very serious people. You have 60 seconds to unlock his handcuffs before this call is escalated. The clock is ticking. The line went dead. Reynolds stared at the phone. National asset. Serious people. The coded language was unmistakable. Before he could even process the threat, the red light started blinking again. Carol answered, looking even more terrified than before. Sergeant, it's a captain from the Office of the Chief of Naval Operations. The blood drained from Reynolds' face. The CNO, the Pentagon. This was no longer an internal affair. This was a national security incident unfolding in his booking room. He grabbed the phone. Reynolds. Sergeant Reynolds. A new voice, crisp, authoritative, and radiating Ivy League intelligence came down the line. This is Captain Matthews, aide to Admiral Davison. We are tracking the unlawful detainment of one of our officers, Lieutenant Foster. I trust you are in the process of rectifying this egregious error? Yes, sir, Captain, Good, Matthews interrupted, because my next call is to the Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. We have a live feed of your precinct's security cameras and audio from Lieutenant Foster's person. We know everything that has happened since the moment of the initial traffic stop. We know the charge is fraudulent. Your deputy, Mark Slater, has committed a federal crime. You need to understand the gravity of the situation you are now in. Reynolds' hand was slick with sweat. Audio from his person. The calm, collected seal was wired. Of course he was. He was a walking, breathing, intelligence-gathering machine. They had everything. Slater wasn't just going to lose his job, he was going to prison. Slater, who had been watching this unfold with a growing sense of dread, finally seemed to grasp the magnitude of his blunder. His face, once smug and arrogant, had turned a pasty, sickly white. The red light began to flash again, and again, and again. It was a relentless strobe, a beacon of their doom. Another deputy picked up a different line. Sir, it's the FBI's Los Angeles field office, he yelled across the room. Carol, looking like she was about to faint, took another call. It's a congresswoman's office? The station had become the epicenter of a political and military earthquake. The phone system was completely overloaded. Every line was blinking. The calls were a flood, a deluge of power and authority crashing down on their small local precinct. It was Protocol Scimitar, fully unleashed. It was a coordinated, overwhelming response designed to paralyze and intimidate. And it was working. Just then, the door to the booking area burst open. Police Chief Miller, a man usually seen only in meetings or press conferences, stormed in. He was in his late 50s, his face flushed, his tie askew. He was holding his cell phone to his ear, and his expression was one of pure, unadulterated terror. Yes, Admiral, I understand completely. No, sir, there are no excuses. It is being handled personally by me right now, Miller was saying into the phone, his voice trembling. He looked around the room, his eyes wild with panic, until they landed on Slater. He ended the call. Slater! He roared, his voice cracking. My office! Now! He then turned to Reynolds, his eyes pleading. Frank, for the love of God, get those cuffs off that man. Get him some water. Get him whatever he wants. Just fix this. Sergeant Reynolds didn't need to be told twice. He walked over to Lieutenant Foster, key in hand. As he unlocked the handcuffs, he leaned in and spoke in a low voice for Foster's ears only. "Lieutenant," he said, the metal clicking open, "on behalf of every cop who actually respects the uniform, I am profoundly sorry." Foster rubbed his wrists, his expression unreadable. He simply nodded. He knew this was just the beginning. The deluge from the Pentagon had breached the walls. Now came the flood. Chief Miller's office felt like a vacuum-sealed chamber where all the air had been sucked out. Officer Slater sat in a chair opposite the chief's sprawling oak desk, shrinking under the furious glare of his superior. Sergeant Reynolds stood near the door, a silent, imposing witness to the proceedings. The chief wasn't yelling anymore. He was speaking in a low, tight, terrifyingly controlled voice that promised ruin. "I just spent 10 minutes on the phone with a one-star admiral," Miller began, his words like chips of ice. "He informed me in no uncertain terms that if Lieutenant Foster is not treated as a guest of honor and safely returned to his command, a team of JAG lawyers and federal investigators would be rappelling through these windows by sundown. So, Mark, I want you to tell me, from the very beginning, what happened on the PCH today." Slater, his face slick with sweat, began to recite his version of the events. It was a story built on half-truths and outright fabrications. "He was acting suspiciously, Chief, evasive. His calm was unnatural. I believed he was impersonating an officer to get out of a ticket. When I asked him to step out of the vehicle, he became argumentative, and I had to detain him for officer safety." Miller listened without interruption, his fingers steepled under his chin. When Slater finished his pathetic, self-serving account, the chief's expression hadn't changed. "Reynolds," Miller said, not taking his eyes off Slater, "bring up Deputy Slater's body cam footage on the monitor, now." Reynolds nodded, moving to the large monitor on the wall. He typed in Slater's badge number and the incident timestamp. A few seconds later, the footage flickered to life. The audio was crystal clear. The video, a first-person view from Slater's chest, was damning. They watched the entire 8-minute encounter unfold in excruciating detail. They saw the cracked tail light that wasn't there. They heard Lieutenant Foster's calm, respectful voice saying, "Of course, officer," and "Yes, Sergeant." They heard him narrate his every move. They heard Slater's own voice dripping with sarcasm and contempt. "Just got back from playing hero?" They watched as Slater ignored the perfectly valid military ID. They saw Foster's unshakable composure, a stark contrast to Slater's escalating aggression. They heard Foster's final, polite warning. "I am respectfully advising you to stop. This is an unlawful arrest." And they heard Slater's response, twisting the words into a threat. The video played out, every frame, every word, a nail in the coffin of Slater's career. The footage didn't show a suspicious, argumentative man. It showed a professional military officer being harassed and unjustly arrested by a deputy on a power trip. When the footage ended, the silence in the office was absolute. Slater stared at the blank screen, his mouth slightly agape. He had clearly forgotten how thoroughly his own camera would expose his lies. It doesn't show the whole context," he stammered weakly. "The whole context?" Miller's voice was barely a whisper. "The context, Mark, is that you lied. You lied to my face. You lied in your verbal report, and I have no doubt you were about to lie in your official written report. You didn't see a suspicious person. You saw a uniform you didn't think he deserved to wear, and you decided to teach him a lesson." The chief turned to his computer. "I had a feeling about you, Slater." He typed a few commands, entering a password that unlocked the department's sealed internal affairs records. He pulled up Slater's file. "Let's look at the context, shall we?" On the screen, a list of complaints appeared. 4 of them in the last 3 years. All of them sealed. All of them resolved without action. 2021, complaint of excessive force during a traffic stop. A 45-year-old businessman. The complaint was dismissed. 2022, complaint of verbal abuse and an illegal search. A 28-year-old female driver. Dismissed. 2022. Complaint of harassment and intimidation. A 50-year-old man in a veteran's ball cap. Dismissed. 2023. Complaint of profiling and an unwarranted arrest that was later thrown out by the DA. A 30-year-old man in a luxury car. Dismissed. A clear, undeniable pattern. Officer Slater had a history of targeting people he felt were beneath him, or in this case, audaciously above him. He was a bully with a badge, and the system had protected him, had closed ranks around him, until today. Today, he had picked a fight with the wrong person, and in doing so, had exposed the rot within his own file. 4 complaints, Mark, Miller said, his voice heavy with disgust. 4 times you got a slap on the wrist and were sent back out on the street because it was one person's word against a deputy's. But this time is different. This time, your victim was a national hero. This time, your victim was wired for sound by the U.S. Navy. And this time, your own body camera served as the primary witness for the prosecution. Miller stood up, his face a mask of cold fury. Your career in law enforcement is over. As of this moment, you are suspended pending termination. Hand over your badge and your weapon. Slater looked up, his face a wreck of disbelief and panic. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. Chief, please. Now, Miller commanded. Slowly, shakily, Mark Slater unclipped his badge from his uniform. The metal felt heavy, alien. He unholstered his service weapon, placing it on the polished oak of the desk. With those 2 actions, his identity, his power, his entire world unraveled. The truth, captured on video and buried in a file, had finally come to light, and it was burning his life to the ground. The release of Lieutenant Daniel Foster was a stark contrast to his arrival. There was no booking process, no mugshot, no fingerprinting. The paperwork vanished. Chief Miller personally escorted Foster from a quiet conference room, where he'd been given a bottle of water and a formal, groveling apology, out through a private rear exit of the station. Waiting for him was not his Mustang, but a black, government-issue SUV with tinted windows. Standing beside it was a Navy captain, his own uniform crisp and immaculate. He saluted Foster crisply. "Lieutenant, Captain Hayes, I'm here to escort you back to Coronado. Glad to see you're okay." "I'm fine, sir," Foster said, returning the salute. The transfer of authority was complete. He was back under the protection of the U.S. Navy. "Your vehicle will be retrieved and delivered to the base by tomorrow morning, fully detailed," Chief Miller said, his voice strained. "Again, Lieutenant, on behalf of my department, I cannot apologize enough." Foster just looked at him, his gaze level and unblinking. "Your apology is noted, Chief," he said. "But it wasn't you who put the cuffs on me. It's your deputy who needs to understand the mistake he made." He got into the SUV without a backward glance. The vehicle pulled away smoothly, leaving Chief Miller standing alone in the parking lot, watching the symbol of his colossal failure disappear down the road. The story should have ended there, an internal matter quietly and embarrassingly resolved. But in the modern world, secrets have a short shelf life. Someone inside the Lost Hills station, a deputy disgusted by Slater's actions and the department's history of protecting him, made a choice. They took their cell phone, recorded the body cam footage from Sergeant Reynolds' monitor, and sent the 8-minute clip to a popular military-focused blog. The title of the post was simple and explosive. "Exclusive video. Decorated Navy SEAL arrested on PCH for being too calm." The internet ignited. Within the first hour, the video had 50,000 views. Veterans and active duty service members were the first to react, their comments a tidal wave of fury and disgust. They recognized the uniform, the medals, the quiet professionalism of Foster. They also recognized the arrogant, insecure bully in the deputy's uniform. By hour 3, it had 1 million views and was trending on Twitter. Hashtag Justice for Foster became a national rallying cry. Major news outlets, sensing a viral story, picked it up. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC. Suddenly, the grainy body cam footage was being broadcast into millions of homes, played on a loop. Pundits debated it, veterans were brought on as guests to express their outrage, and legal analysts dissected the illegality of the arrest. The story had everything: a clear hero, a detestable villain, and irrefutable video proof. Veterans organizations released scathing statements. The VFW called the arrest an insult to every man and woman who has ever worn the uniform. The American Legion demanded a full federal investigation and the immediate firing of Officer Slater. The Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, IAVA, started a petition calling for systemic police reform in training for interactions with military personnel. By the next morning, 24 hours after the arrest, the story was international. Reuters, the Associated Press, the BBC, everyone was covering the story of the American hero humiliated on the side of a highway. The Lost Hills Sheriff's Station was besieged by news vans. Chief Miller was forced to hold a press conference where he looked haggard and broken, announcing Slater's suspension and promising a full and transparent investigation. No one believed him. The court of public opinion had already reached its verdict. The Pentagon, which had initially worked behind the scenes, was forced to issue a public statement. The Department of the Navy is aware of the unacceptable and unlawful detention of a decorated naval officer. The statement read, "We have full faith that the Department of Justice will take appropriate action to ensure accountability." The phrase, "appropriate action," was a clear signal. This was no longer a local police matter. The federal government was officially involved. The viral outrage had done its job. It had shined a spotlight so bright that the shadows where Slater's misconduct had once hidden were completely vaporized. In a quiet room on Naval Base Coronado, Lieutenant Daniel Foster watched his own arrest play out on a cable news network. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if watching a movie about someone else. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't wanted the attention. He had simply wanted to de-escalate a bad situation and get to his event. But now, it was bigger than him. It was about the uniform. It was about respect. It was about the quiet assumption that the person wearing the uniform, regardless of who they are, has earned a baseline of trust, not suspicion. The public outrage wasn't just for him, it was for what he represented. And as the hashtag with his name continued to trend across the globe, he knew there was no going back. The system that had failed him was now being held accountable by the very public it was sworn to protect. The pressure, both public and political, was immense. The Department of Justice, spurred by the direct request from the Department of the Navy and the volcanic eruption of public outrage, moved with a speed rarely seen in federal bureaucracy. The FBI's Los Angeles field office, which had already made the initial courtesy call to the station, was officially assigned the case. Their investigation was less of an investigation and more of a confirmation. The evidence was absolute, a prosecutor's dream. They had the body cam footage from Slater. They had the audio from Foster's personal recording device. They had testimony from Sergeant Reynolds, who detailed Slater's lies and the station's panicked response to the Pentagon's calls. They had Foster's pristine service record, which they acquired directly from NavSpec Warcom. And most importantly, they had Slater's personnel file, with its damning pattern of behavior that painted a clear picture of a man unfit to wear a badge. Less than 72 hours after the traffic stop, a federal prosecutor from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Central District of California convened a grand jury. The evidence was presented. The indictment was handed down. Mark Slater was at home, on suspension, when the federal agents came for him. 2 FBI agents, dressed in dark, unassuming suits, knocked on his door. When he answered, there was no aggression, no shouting. It was calm, professional, and utterly terrifying. "Mark Slater?" one agent asked, though he already knew the answer. "Yes?" "You're under arrest." The agent held up the warrant. The charges were read to him right there on his own doorstep. 1. Deprivation of rights under color of law, Title 18, U.S. Code, Section 242. For willfully depriving Lieutenant Foster of his constitutional right to be free from unreasonable seizure. This was the heavyweight charge, carrying a sentence of up to 10 years. 2. False imprisonment of a federal officer. While Foster wasn't a federal law enforcement officer, his status as an active-duty military member performing his duties, traveling to a mandatory event, put the crime in a gray area that prosecutors were eager to exploit. 3. Making false statements to federal investigators. In his initial interview with the FBI, Slater had stuck to his fabricated story. The bodycam footage proved he had lied to them, a felony. The news of his arrest broke immediately. A local news helicopter captured the footage of Slater, no longer in his crisp deputy uniform, but in jeans and a t-shirt, being placed in the back of a dark federal sedan. The man who had put an American hero in handcuffs was now in handcuffs himself. The irony was lost on no one. The day after the federal indictment, Chief Miller made the final move. He held another press conference. Mark Slater's employment with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department has been terminated, effective immediately, he announced, his voice grim. His actions are a disgrace to the badge and do not represent the values of the men and women of this department. His 11-year career was over. His pension was gone. His union, seeing the mountain of irrefutable evidence and the political toxicity of the case, offered only a token defense before quietly distancing themselves. Slater was alone, cast out from the very system that had once protected him. His arraignment was a media circus. He was led into the federal courthouse in downtown Los Angeles, wearing an Orange County Jail jumpsuit, his face pale and unshaven. He pleaded not guilty, a formality. The prosecutor argued against bail, citing the pattern of aggression in his file and calling him a danger to the community he was once sworn to protect. The judge agreed. Bail was denied. Mark Slater was escorted from the courtroom and taken to a federal detention center. He was no longer Officer Slater. He was inmate number 79,531. He had traded his patrol car for a 6-by-8-foot cell. He had traded his authority for a number. The system he had wielded as a weapon had now turned on him with cold, efficient precision. In his desperate need to feel powerful by humiliating a man in a decorated uniform, he had initiated his own destruction. He had believed his badge made him untouchable. He had never considered that the uniform his victim wore came with the backing of a power far greater than his own, the full, unblinking might of the United States government. The wheels of justice, once started, were now grinding forward, and he was directly in their path. The trial of United States versus Mark Slater was short. The prosecution's case was a methodical, unassailable presentation of facts. They didn't need theatrics. They had the video. They played the body cam footage for the jury on a massive screen in the courtroom. The jurors watched, their faces grim, as the entire sordid affair unfolded. They heard the condescension in Slater's voice. They saw the professionalism of Lieutenant Foster. The prosecutor, a sharp assistant U.S. attorney named Maria Flores, kept her arguments concise. "This case isn't about a cracked taillight," she said in her opening statement. "It's not even about a bad attitude. This is about an abuse of power. It's about a man with a badge who saw a symbol of honor, integrity, and service, and for reasons known only to him, decided to defile it." Sergeant Reynolds was called as a key witness. On the stand, in his full-dress uniform, he recounted the events at the station with quiet authority. He explained the significance of Foster's ribbons, particularly the Silver Star. He told the jury how he instantly knew the uniform and the man wearing it were authentic. "In 30 years of law enforcement," Reynolds said, his voice resonating through the silent courtroom, "it was one of the worst arrests I have ever seen. There was no cause. There was no justification. It was an abuse of the badge." Slater's defense attorney did his best, but he had nothing to work with. He argued that Slater was making a split-second decision in a stressful situation. Flores dismantled that argument with cold precision. "What was stressful about the situation, counsel?" she asked during her cross-examination of Slater. "Was it the part where Lieutenant Foster complied with every order? Or the part where he respectfully answered every question? The only stress in that situation was the stress inside your own client's head." Lieutenant Foster was called to testify. He walked to the stand in his dress whites, a living, breathing embodiment of the prosecution's case. He recounted the events calmly, factually, and without a hint of malice. He simply told the truth. When Flores asked him what he was thinking when the handcuffs were being put on, his answer silenced the room. "I was thinking," Foster said, his voice steady, "that the oath I took was to protect this country from all enemies, foreign and domestic. I never imagined I'd have to worry about that oath on the side of a highway in California." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. Guilty, on all counts. Slater, standing at the defense table, showed no emotion as the verdict was read. He seemed like a hollowed-out version of the man who had stood so arrogantly on the highway. 2 weeks later, at the sentencing hearing, the judge, a no-nonsense woman and a veteran of the Marine Corps, looked down at Slater from the bench. "Mr. Slater," she began, her voice devoid of sympathy, "you held a position of public trust. You were given a badge and a gun and the authority to deprive citizens of their liberty. It is one of the greatest responsibilities our society can bestow, and you abused it." "You didn't see a fellow public servant," she continued, her eyes fixed on him. "You didn't see a man who had risked his life for this country. You saw a challenge. You saw a uniform you felt you could diminish to make yourself feel bigger. You were wrong. The uniform is bigger than you. The honor it represents is bigger than you. And today, the justice it demands is bigger than you." The sentence came down like a hammer. 10 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole for at least 8. A decade of his life erased. In the months that followed, the fallout continued. Lieutenant Foster filed a civil rights lawsuit against the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. The county, facing a mountain of negative publicity and indefensible evidence, settled quickly for $7.5 million. Foster donated a significant portion of the settlement to veterans' charities. The incident led to the passage of a new state law, nicknamed Foster's Law, which mandated specific training for all California law enforcement on how to properly interact with and verify the status of military personnel. The Lost Hills Station underwent a complete overhaul of its command structure, and Chief Miller took an early retirement. Lieutenant Foster, now a lieutenant commander, continues to serve. He never wanted to be a symbol, but he became one. He is a reminder that true strength isn't aggression, but composure. True authority isn't demanded, but earned. Why did this happen? To understand Mark Slater's actions, we have to look past the uniform and see the man. Slater's file hinted at a deep-seated inferiority complex, a resentment for any authority that wasn't his own. Perhaps he once tried to join the military and failed. Perhaps he saw in Lieutenant Foster's quiet confidence and decorated uniform everything he felt he lacked: genuine respect, proven courage, and an unimpeachable sense of purpose. Foster's calm wasn't suspicious. It was infuriating to a man like Slater because it was a language of control he couldn't speak. He couldn't dominate Foster, so he chose to humiliate him. It was a pathetic attempt to level a playing field that existed only in his own mind. Could this have gone differently? What if Lieutenant Foster had argued? The situation would have escalated faster, Slater's report would have seemed more credible, and the video might have been interpreted as mutual aggression. His disciplined calm was his greatest weapon. What if he hadn't been able to make that single coded phone call? Justice would likely have still come, but it would have been slower, tangled in bureaucracy. The protocol scimitar was a failsafe, a recognition by his command that in the modern world, even their most elite operators can be vulnerable to threats far from any battlefield. The lesson is clear. De-escalation and discipline are paramount, but having a powerful system at your back is the ultimate defense. This story reached a just conclusion, but it forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Justice for Lieutenant Foster was swift because he was the perfect victim. He was a decorated hero, backed by the full power of the Pentagon, with irrefutable video and audio evidence. But what about the countless others who aren't? What about the ordinary citizen who faces a similar abuse of power without a silver star on their chest, without a direct line to the Department of Defense, without a viral video? True justice shouldn't require a hero. Accountability should be the standard, not the exception. What does it say about our society when the people we trust to enforce the law are the ones who break it? And how can we ensure that every citizen, in or out of uniform, is granted the same respect that Lieutenant Foster had to have the Pentagon demand for him? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think the 10-year sentence was enough? Share this story if you believe accountability is something worth fighting for.